was a kid, one of my heroes was a guy named Bob Riggle, because he had a car that could do something nobody else's car could do.
Most people know Jay Leno as the former host of The Tonight Show, the comedian with a passion for automobiles, and a man whose garage has become almost as famous as he is. Millions of fans have watched him showcase exotic supercars, priceless classics, and rare automotive treasures on television and online. But what many people don't realize is that some of the most fascinating machines in his collection are not the Ferraris, McLarens, or Duesenbergs that grab all the headlines. Hidden among the stars of his collection are vehicles so unusual, so rare, and so bizarre that even longtime viewers often miss them completely. Some represent technologies that were decades ahead of their time. Others were built in such small numbers that they should have disappeared forever. A few are so strange that they barely look like automobiles at all. And once you discover what's hiding inside Jay Leno's massive garage, it's easy to understand why car enthusiasts around the world are fascinated by it. One of the most incredible machines in the collection is a vehicle that sounds less like a car and more like a jet aircraft preparing for takeoff. The moment the engine starts, there is no familiar rumble. Instead, a soft whine begins to build. The sound rises higher and higher until it becomes an unmistakable scream that seems completely out of place in an automobile. That's because the vehicle isn't powered by a traditional piston engine at all. It's Jay Leno's legendary Chrysler Turbine Car. Back in the early 1960s, Chrysler embarked on one of the boldest automotive experiments ever attempted. The company wanted to find out whether turbine engines, the same basic technology used in aircraft, could eventually replace conventional car engines. Instead of keeping the project hidden behind laboratory doors, Chrysler did something extraordinary. The company built dozens of working prototype vehicles and handed them to ordinary American families. Engineers wanted real-world feedback from real drivers. For a brief moment, the future seemed incredibly promising. Drivers loved the smooth operation. They loved the futuristic sound. They loved the fact that the engine could run on multiple fuel types. Unlike traditional engines that required specific fuels, the turbine power plant could burn diesel, kerosene, and several other combustible liquids. It sounded like the beginning of a transportation revolution. But that revolution never happened. Despite the excitement surrounding the project, Chrysler eventually abandoned the idea. The technology was simply too expensive to produce on a large scale. Many of the vehicles were deliberately destroyed, making surviving examples incredibly rare. Today, only a handful remain. For Jay Leno, owning one was the fulfillment of a dream that started decades earlier. As a teenager, he first saw a turbine car at the 1964 World's Fair. The experience left a lasting impression. While other visitors moved on to the next exhibit, Leno stood mesmerized, watching the futuristic vehicle circle a display track over and over again. The image stayed with him for years. Eventually, after becoming one of the most recognizable entertainers in America, he finally managed to acquire one of the surviving examples. But owning such a rare machine came with challenges. Unlike modern cars, replacement parts don't exist on store shelves. When the turbine engine eventually suffered a major failure, restoring it became a massive undertaking. Specialists had to track down engineers connected to the original program and gather knowledge that had nearly vanished with time. The restoration effort became almost as remarkable as the car itself. Today, the vehicle remains one of the most extraordinary survivors of automotive history, a rolling reminder of a future that nearly happened but never arrived. Yet as rare as the turbine car is, it isn't the strangest sleeper hiding in Jay Leno's garage. That honor may belong to a tiny hatchback that looks completely ordinary. At first glance, most people wouldn't give it a second look. It's small. It's simple. It's the type of economy car that normally disappears into parking lots without attracting attention. Nothing about its appearance suggests speed, power, or excitement. But appearances can be dangerously misleading. This unassuming vehicle is known as the Ford Shogun. The story begins with two automotive visionaries who wanted to create something outrageous. Instead of building another flashy sports car, they decided to transform a humble Ford Festiva into a machine capable of embarrassing some of the world's most respected performance cars. Their solution was simple in theory, but insane in practice. They removed the tiny factory engine and replaced it with a powerful V6 mounted behind the front seats. The new layout transformed the little economy car into a mid-engine performance monster. Suddenly, the harmless commuter car had become something entirely different. The result was astonishing. The Shogun could accelerate with a level of urgency that shocked anyone who drove it. Despite looking like an ordinary hatchback, it delivered performance numbers that rivaled much more expensive sports cars of its era. Even better, almost nobody expected it. Drivers would pull up beside the tiny vehicle at traffic lights, assuming it was just another economy car. Moments later, they would watch it disappear into the distance. That's exactly what made the Shogun special. It was the ultimate sleeper. Only a handful were ever produced, making them exceptionally rare today. Jay Leno purchased his example when the project was still new, and he has kept it ever since. For him, the appeal isn't simply speed. It's creativity. The Shogun represents the kind of bold thinking that defines many of the vehicles in his collection. It's a machine created by people willing to ignore conventional wisdom and pursue an idea simply because it seemed exciting. And that's a recurring theme throughout Leno's garage. Many of his favorite vehicles aren't necessarily the most expensive or prestigious. Instead, they're the ones that tell unique stories. Stories of inventors, dreamers, and engineers who dare to try something different. That spirit becomes even more obvious when you encounter one of the strangest creations hidden inside the collection. Unlike the Turbine Car or the Shogun, this machine barely resembles a traditional automobile. In fact, many people aren't even sure what category it belongs to. The vehicle was created by designer Randy Grubb, a craftsman known for building machines that blur the line between transportation and art. Grubb doesn't think like a typical car designer. Instead of focusing solely on performance or practicality, he creates rolling sculptures that look as though they arrived from another dimension. One of his most unusual creations is a futuristic vehicle inspired by classic science fiction imagery. Its streamlined body resembles something that might have appeared in a 1930s vision of the future. Curved aluminum panels flow seamlessly from front to back, creating a shape unlike anything else on the road. The machine looks more like a spacecraft than a scooter. Every panel was crafted by hand. Every detail reflects countless hours of work and imagination. Yet despite its artistic appearance, the vehicle remains fully functional. It can be driven on public roads. It can lean through corners. It can reach impressive speeds. In other words, it isn't merely a sculpture. It's transportation transformed into art. For Jay Leno, that's exactly the kind of innovation worth preserving. His garage isn't simply a collection of valuable objects. It's a museum of ideas. Some ideas succeeded. Others failed. But every machine represents a moment when someone looked at the world and imagined a different possibility. And the next vehicle hidden in the collection tells perhaps one of the most overlooked stories in American automotive history. It's a car built by a company that most people have never even heard of. A company founded by a man determined to accomplish what many believed was impossible. His name was Briggs Cunningham, and his dream was to prove that an American car and an American driver could compete against the best Europe had to offer. That dream would eventually produce one of the rarest automobiles Jay Leno has ever owned. But the full story behind that remarkable machine is even more surprising than anyone expected. The story of Briggs Cunningham begins with an ambition that sounds almost impossible today. Cunningham wasn't simply interested in owning fast cars. He wanted to prove that America could build automobiles capable of standing toe-to-toe with the greatest European racing machines in the world. His ultimate target was the 24 Hours of Le Mans. To compete as a manufacturer, however, Cunningham faced a major obstacle. Racing regulations required a certain number of road-going cars to be produced before a manufacturer could qualify. So Cunningham did something extraordinary. He essentially created his own automobile company. The result was the Cunningham C3, an elegant grand touring car that combined American engineering with Italian styling. Underneath its sophisticated bodywork was a powerful Chrysler Hemi V8, while the body itself was shaped and constructed in Italy. Only a tiny number were ever produced. That alone makes the C3 fascinating, but its real significance comes from what it represented. Cunningham wasn't trying to build another luxury car for wealthy Americans. He was trying to establish an American presence in a world dominated by European manufacturers. The finished cars were extraordinarily expensive for their time. Each one required extensive handwork, and the production process was anything but economical. Ultimately, only a very small run was completed. Cunningham's racing operation never achieved the overall Le Mans victory he wanted, but it came remarkably close. His cars demonstrated that a small American team could compete against much larger and better-funded European operations. That's why Leno's Cunningham matters. It's not simply a rare automobile. It's a surviving piece of an American racing dream. And just when you think you've seen the strangest technology in Leno's collection, another turbine appears. But this time, the story is completely different. Decades after Chrysler experimented with turbine-powered passenger cars, Jay Leno became involved in creating a new machine that would bring the concept into the modern era. The result was called the EcoJet. Unlike the Chrysler Turbine Car, the EcoJet wasn't an experiment conducted by a major automaker trying to predict the future of transportation. It was a custom-built demonstration of what could happen when automotive designers and engineers were given permission to think without conventional limits. The idea began as a conversation involving Leno and members of his garage team. The concept eventually reached General Motors design leadership, and the project quickly evolved from a rough idea into an actual automobile. The design looked like something pulled straight from a futuristic racing game. Its body incorporated aggressive aerodynamic shapes, inspired by fighter aircraft and Formula One machinery. Underneath the dramatic exterior was a highly specialized structure, while the power plant was something you would normally expect to find in an aircraft or helicopter rather than a road car. A turbine engine. This was not a traditional V8 screaming through an exhaust system. It was a machine that produced power in a completely different way. The EcoJet's turbine was capable of producing hundreds of horsepower, and the car was designed to run using alternative fuel technology. Of course, efficiency was never really the point. This was a technological demonstration. It was Leno and his team asking a simple question. What if the turbine idea had never been abandoned? What could it look like if engineers were given modern materials, modern design techniques, and decades of additional knowledge? The answer was one of the most outrageous vehicles ever associated with Leno's garage. And putting the EcoJet beside the older Chrysler Turbine Car creates an incredible comparison. One represents the future as imagined in the early 1960s. The other represents the same basic dream revisited decades later. Two completely different generations. Two completely different designs. But both built around the same extraordinary idea, using a turbine engine to power a road vehicle. And that isn't the only forgotten technology hiding inside Leno's collection. Some of the vehicles aren't famous because they were revolutionary. They're famous because the companies that built them disappeared. One such example is the Sainte Claire. Its story begins with Harold Wills, a man whose name has been largely forgotten by the general public despite his important role in early American automotive history. Wills had been closely connected to Henry Ford and eventually left the Ford organization to create automobiles under his own name. His cars featured engineering that was unusually sophisticated for their time. The company produced thousands of vehicles, but compared with giants like Ford and General Motors, it remained a small operation. Eventually, it disappeared. Today, surviving examples are incredibly scarce. Leno's car has an especially dramatic history because it spent years sitting inside a shipping container in the desert before eventually being rescued and restored. Imagine discovering a machine like that after decades of neglect. Under layers of dust and deterioration was a piece of automotive history that most people had completely forgotten. That's one of the things that makes Leno's garage so different. He isn't only interested in cars that have remained famous. Sometimes he's interested in saving cars that history has nearly erased. The same philosophy can be seen in another unusual machine, the NSU Spider. To most casual observers, the little German sports car might not look particularly revolutionary. But hidden behind its compact design was a technology that would later become famous around the world. The NSU Spider was one of the earliest production cars to use a rotary engine. Years later, Mazda would become synonymous with rotary-powered automobiles, but NSU was experimenting with the technology long before the rotary became widely recognized. The Spider's engine was compact and unusual, producing its power from a design fundamentally different from the conventional piston engine. Only a limited number were produced, and although the car itself was small and relatively modest by modern performance standards, its place in automotive history is enormous. The company eventually struggled with the challenges associated with rotary engine technology and was absorbed into the corporate history that eventually led toward Audi. Today, the NSU Spider survives as a reminder of an experimental era when manufacturers were willing to take enormous risks on unfamiliar engineering concepts. Then there is the Jensen CV8. At first glance, it might look like another stylish British Grand Tourer. But underneath its elegant exterior was an unusual combination of British craftsmanship and American muscle. The car used a large Chrysler V8 inside a fiberglass body, creating a distinctive blend of European design and American power. Only a relatively small number were produced, and because the Jensen Interceptor became far more famous later, the CV8 gradually disappeared from public memory. Yet that's exactly why a car like this belongs in Leno's collection. It represents the forgotten chapter before the famous chapter. The experiments, the dead ends, the vehicles that didn't become cultural icons but still mattered. And then we arrive at perhaps the most fascinating automobile in the entire collection, a Mercedes-Benz 600. At first, that might not sound particularly shocking. After all, Mercedes-Benz is one of the most famous luxury car manufacturers in history. But the 600 was never an ordinary Mercedes. It was an engineering statement. Almost everything about the car was excessive. The doors, windows, seats, sunroof, and even other functions were operated using an extraordinarily complex hydraulic system rather than the simple electric mechanisms found in most cars. The vehicle was massively engineered and extremely expensive. It was designed for people who demanded the highest level of luxury, regardless of cost. Heads of state, celebrities, industrialists, and powerful political figures were among the people associated with the model. The car itself was enormous, heavy, and built with an almost obsessive attention to engineering. But Jay Leno's example takes the story to another level. His 1972 Mercedes-Benz 600 was modified with a supercharger. Mercedes never produced a factory supercharged version of the 600. Leno's car therefore became something completely different from the standard model. The already powerful V8 was transformed into an even more aggressive machine, producing substantially more power than the original configuration. And perhaps the most remarkable part is that Leno doesn't simply keep this incredible car hidden behind velvet ropes. He drives it. That detail explains more about Jay Leno's collection than almost anything else. A traditional museum might preserve priceless vehicles behind glass. Leno's philosophy is different. He believes automobiles are machines. Machines are meant to operate. They're meant to start. They're meant to move. They are meant to be experienced. That's why a 60-year-old turbine car isn't merely displayed. That's why a tiny Ford Festiva-based monster isn't treated like a sculpture. That's why forgotten brands are given a second life. And that's why one of the most complicated luxury cars ever produced is still driven instead of being permanently locked away. When you look at the collection from that perspective, the value of these automobiles isn't measured only in dollars. It's measured in stories. The Chrysler Turbine represents a future that never arrived. The Ford Shogun represents the madness of turning an economy car into a performance machine. The strange custom scooters show what happens when automotive design becomes art. The Cunningham C3 represents an American dream of conquering Le Mans. The EcoJet revives the turbine dream in a completely different era. The The Sainte Claire and NSU Spider preserve technologies and companies that might otherwise have disappeared from memory. And the Mercedes-Benz 600 demonstrates just how far engineers were willing to go when cost wasn't supposed to matter. That may be the real secret of Jay Leno's garage. It isn't simply enormous. It's a collection of forgotten possibilities. Every corner contains evidence of something that someone once believed could change the automobile forever. Some ideas succeeded. Some failed. Some were simply too early. And others became obsolete before the world understood how interesting they really were. That's why walking through Leno's garage is more like walking through automotive history than visiting a traditional car collection. The famous cars are only the beginning. The real treasures are often the ones sitting quietly in the background, waiting for someone to look closely enough to understand what they're seeing. And perhaps that's the biggest surprise of all. For years, millions of people have watched Jay Leno's automotive adventures. They've seen the celebrities, the supercars, the restorations, and the famous classics. But hidden among all of those recognizable machines are vehicles that almost nobody would identify at first glance. Cars that survived when their brothers were destroyed. Cars built by companies that no longer exist. Cars powered by technology that never became mainstream. And machines that were created simply because someone refused to accept that an idea was impossible. That's what makes Jay Leno's garage so fascinating. It's not just a place where expensive cars are stored. It's where forgotten automotive dreams continue to live. And as long as Leno keeps starting these engines, driving these machines, and telling their stories, pieces of automotive history that should have disappeared may continue to have a second life. So the next time you see a strange little car sitting quietly in the background of one of Jay Leno's videos, don't assume it's just another forgotten vehicle. There may be an incredible story hiding underneath the hood. Because in Jay Leno's garage, the strangest car in the room isn't always the one that looks the most impressive. Sometimes it's the one nobody notices. And that's exactly what makes his collection so extraordinary.